Hey guys, this is Goff, and in this training video, I'm going to share with you probably one of the most asked questions that I get, and that is, what is the difference between a lease option and seller finance? So let's jump inside and let's get to it. I'm going to cover the definition, a line-by-line comparison, and similarities between the two strategies. I'm also going to share with you the one strategy you should never do because you could get into a lot of trouble. All right, let's go. All right, so what is a lease option? So no matter if I say lease option, rent to own, or lease purchase, they're essentially the exact same thing. So we're taking control without taking title. Simply defined, a lease option is a lease agreement combined with a purchase agreement. Through a lease option agreement, a buyer leases the property, usually 1 to 3 years, and then has the right or option to purchase the property on or before the end of that agreement. So to keep it simple, you have a lease agreement, so you're just leasing the property. You also have what's called a purchase agreement, giving you the option to purchase this property on or before the end of that agreement. That in itself, if you combine the two together, you now have what's called a lease option agreement. So what is seller or owner finance? So seller finance, owner finance is essentially the same thing. This is any situation where the seller acts as a financial institution, receiving payments toward the purchase of a piece of property. Ultimately, the seller becomes the bank. There are many types of seller financing which can be done even if there's existing financing on the property. Knowing how to use seller financing will enable you to make money with one of the most profitable strategies in real estate today. I have a link in the description. You can learn all about seller financing as well as lease options. You should go check that out. So let's look at a line-by-line comparison and see how these two strategies measure up. What are the similarities, and maybe help you decide which strategy may be best for you, if not both. So with a lease option, you are renting, so you do not have the deed, where with seller financing, you own the property and you have the deed. This is probably the biggest difference between the two, where with lease options, you just have the option to buy, so you don't own it. With seller financing, you actually own the property. The same way if you went down to the bank and received financing, went to closing with the seller, and the deed was transferred. You can pay up to full price with a lease option. With seller finance, I like to say the sales price will be in the middle. So with lease options, you could pay up to that full price, but of course, you always want to get a good deal. Whereas seller financing, you typically pay less on the sales price because the amount of interest the owner will receive. In the long term, the seller will receive more for the property because of this. When making multiple offers, meaning that we will offer the seller both a lease option and seller finance offer, the lease option sales price should always be higher. Now, there's no set number, you just need to offer less. With the seller finance, I like to keep that in what I call the middle. So if my lease option offer sales price is the highest, I want my seller finance offer to be a little bit less. And then my rock bottom sales price would be our cash offer, where we're going to pay the seller in one lump sum. Now, the great thing of working either the lease option or seller finance, you're buying it on terms. So you can adjust these numbers. If I pay the seller more on the sales price, I might give them less down. If I give them more down, maybe I go less on the sales price, and vice versa. So you could change these numbers how you see fit. With a lease option, the down payment is actually called an option payment. And if you purchase the property on or before the end of the term, it will be credited to the purchase price. If you don't buy, you lose the option payment. With seller financing, you are buying it right now, so your down payment will be immediately credited. Monthly payment is the rental rate or less. With seller finance, the monthly payment is determined by the sales price, the interest rate, and how long you amortize the loan. So when determining the monthly payment for a lease option, remember, you're just renting it. So whatever the rental rate is, and of course you want to come in a little less, so when you lease option it back out, you could charge the new buyer the full rental amount. With seller financing, you'll need a mortgage calculator to arrive at your monthly payment. At minimum, you'll need the sales price, of course, minus your down payment. You're going to set an interest rate. In most cases, you'll amortize the loan for 30 years to keep the payment as low as possible. You may need to adjust the numbers a little just to make it work for you and the seller. Lease option term is generally 1 to 3 years, and with seller finance, it's 1 to 10 years. So the length of the term is basically How long will the seller do this deal? Generally, with a lease option, sellers want to go short term because they want to be cashed out. Your goal as a real estate investor is to get a longer term. Now, even if I go 3 years with the seller, once I put a new buyer in the home, I only go 1 year with them. So if the new buyer cashes us out after 12 months, the seller gets cashed out. Even though we had 3 years with the seller, our buyer closed the deal in 12 months. Remember, we have the option to buy on or before the end of the agreement. As an investor, you always want to try and get a longer term in case the buyer doesn't buy. With seller financing, this is usually a longer term. Now, even though you amortize the loan out for 30 years, most sellers won't wait 30 years to be cashed out. So we set what's called a balloon. This balloon is the term of 1 to 10 years. So we'll make payments each month for this period of time, and whatever our balance is at that time, we have to cash the seller out by either writing a check or refinancing the loan. With lease options, taxes and insurance are paid by owner. Seller financing, you pay the taxes and insurance. So with lease options, you don't own the home. You just have the option to buy it. So the seller is still responsible for these expenses. With seller financing, you own the home, so it is your responsibility to pay these expenses. Maintenance is $500 per occurrence. Where seller finance, you pay for all the maintenance. So what I like to do as an incentive for the owner with lease options is we pay up to $500 per occurrence for maintenance cost and repairs. And sellers love this because they don't want to be bombarded with all the small stuff that breaks. With seller financing, you own the home, so you are 100% responsible for everything that breaks. No refinance. With seller financing, you have the ability to refinance. I like to mention this with seller financing. Since you own the home, you can refinance the property at any time during the term of the agreement. You may want a better interest rate than what you have with the seller, or maybe you want to pull some cash out. Either way, you have this option, but with lease options, you don't, because you don't own the home. You would have to buy it from the owner first. Limited exit strategies versus multiple exit strategies with seller financing. So let me give you a breakdown of what your exit strategies are with lease options. First, you can obviously live in the home. This is a great option if you yourself, maybe you don't have the credit or down payment money to actually buy it. Next, you could rent the home out, which I wouldn't recommend unless you want to use it as a vacation rental. You can also lease option the property to another buyer that's actually going to live in the home, and you're going to stay in the middle collecting money down each month and when the buyer closes. You could also sell the home because you have the option to buy it. So you're assigning your interest over to a new buyer. With seller financing, you could do just about everything because you own it. So you could rent it, lease option it, sell it, seller finance it, or live in it. You can also sell the mortgage note for a fee. Lease option, you have limited protection, where seller finance, you have the best protection. So in regard to protection, when you seller finance a property, you own it. This is the reason why you have the best protection. Nobody could just take it away from you unless you fail to make payments to the owner or fail to pay taxes. With lease options, you only control the contract, and because you don't own it, you have limited protection from the deal going sideways. Lease options, you have low risk, whereas seller financing, you have high risk. So when I just mentioned protection, risk is the opposite for these strategies. With lease options, you don't own it, so you don't have that responsibility when things go bad. But when you own it with seller financing, you're taking all the risk, from somebody getting hurt on the property, depreciation, obligation to continue to pay, all maintenance and repairs, and possible foreclosure, which will hurt your credit for up to 7 years. With lease options, there's an eviction, but with seller financing, there's a foreclosure. This is another huge difference between the strategies. With lease options, you don't own the home, so if you fail to make payments, you're evicted. But with seller financing, you own it, and this will be a foreclosure. And trust me, evictions are a lot shorter process than a foreclosure. Now, there's one strategy you may have heard of, and that is a land contract or contract for deed. This strategy is not widely used anymore because of several lawsuits, but it's like a combination of both lease option and seller finance. So a land contract, sometimes known as a contract for deed or installment sale agreement, is a contract between the seller and buyer of real property in which the seller provides financing to buy property for an agreed upon price, and the buyer repays the loan in installments. Under a land contract, the seller retains legal title to the property. Now, if you're a seller, you want to do this because you don't want to give away the deed. If you're the buyer, you want the deed. Now, this deal will be structured the same way as a seller finance: sales price, large down payment, interest rate, etc. And the buyer pays for all maintenance costs and repairs. So the buyer is really paying for everything, but doesn't own it. And this is the reason why so many people get caught into this trap. So I wouldn't ever recommend doing this. Think about it. A seller says to you that you can own your own home and the payments are this. You as the buyer get all excited and sign the contract. Whoops. That's the first mistake. Now, when the buyer misses a payment, the seller kicks them out, and this would be an eviction, not a foreclosure. So you've lost your down payment, your equity, and all the money you've put into the home. So you have to be smart when you hear someone say land contract, and I would personally stay away from them. Hope this training helps, and if you got some value at it, please click that like button. It really helps me out. I put together a training video where I could go into more detail about seller financing. You should go and check that out because it's one of the most profitable strategies in real estate. Also, be sure to subscribe because I put out new trainings each week. You can also learn more about our all-in-one software for real estate investors that walks you through the entire buying and selling process at www.myreipro.com.